Welcome to All Things Policy, a daily podcast by the Takshashila Institution. We are a bunch of policy nerds based in Bengaluru, and we like bringing fresh perspectives to Indian affairs and Indian perspectives to global affairs. So grab a cup of coffee, sit back, and join us for today's chat.
Hello and welcome to this episode of All Things Policy. My name is Shobhankita and I'm a researcher in technology geopolitics with the Takshashila Institution. For this conversation, I'm joined by Bharath. Bharath is an associate fellow and also a researcher in AI governance with the Takshashila Institution. Bharath, so glad to have you on this podcast.
I'm happy to be talking to you, Shobhankita.
Awesome. So we wanted to talk about the recent news coverage on Anthropic and try to unpack some of the complexity in both the story and also understand what some of the implications of this might be. So just for some context setting, Anthropic had gotten a $200 million military contract with the Pentagon alongside OpenAI, Google, and X. And Anthropic is obviously the AI company that has launched and has developed the family of language models called Claude. And so for a while now, Anthropic has been chasing the Department of War and the Pentagon contracts because obviously there are some benefits overall to being a defense supplier and a trusted partner to the US military, and we'll unpack that in this conversation. But looks like late 2025 onwards, there's been some disagreements on what AI can be used for. So vis-a-vis Anthropic, they have strict lines and rules forbidding the Pentagon from using AI for two specific things, at least in their stated rules, that is mass domestic surveillance, and the second is fully autonomous lethal weapons. And the Pentagon, however, has pushed back that it should be allowed to use military AI for anything that is lawful according to the law of the land. And so this tussle vis-a-vis the safety guardrails that Anthropic would want for all their customers, including the US military, to use is essentially the boiling point. And what's happened is there's been a round of negotiations where Anthropic looks to have pushed back. The Trump administration also threatened Anthropic with the label of a supply chain risk, which would essentially blacklist them from all federal contracts. And when a round of negotiations failed, looks like now we are in this really interesting but also awkward situation where Anthropic may have just become the first US company to become and to be designated a supply chain risk, because typically that's a label that Chinese companies have typically had. So Anthropic has now said that this is something that it would like to contest in court. And again, a round of negotiations are currently ongoing where some of these safety guardrails that Anthropic may want to have in terms of some moral compunctions from their end looks like it might be a further round of negotiations. So that's the context so far to this conversation. It's an interesting tussle that Anthropic is fighting with the military of its own, of the country where they are headquartered. And there's also this parallel timeline overlapping where Anthropic has accused 3 Chinese AI research labs for distilling their models by bypassing its terms of service. And that's, again, an interesting story that ties into the entire tussle with the military. And you also have to wonder if the timing of the two do not necessarily put together mean more than what they perhaps do just individually. And for this, Bharath, I want to first understand, given this context, what do we understand about what it means for AI to be used in the military? Because I think there's a certain notion about what military AI capabilities are, and maybe some of that is simplistic in terms of fully autonomous systems, but maybe the reality is a little more nuanced. Even while all of this is true, there are reports that Claude was used in the Venezuelan president attack, as well as target attacks and also target identification in Iran. So we see some early reports, although it's not fully clear what it's being used for. But stepping back from the Anthropic story, what do you think people get wrong about military AI, and what I think is the context behind all of this?
Yeah, I think the when you think of military AI, and at least for a lot of people, what comes to mind is like an autonomous, a Terminator style system that can identify targets, execute a mission, and that seems like a scary prospect, right? But when you think, and there might be a lot of different kinds of AI systems already in place in the military for, say, maneuvering a flight through a certain kind of a terrain. Like you might have autonomous vehicles even on the roads today, right? So, but when you talk about a generative AI system like Claude being used for military purposes, there are a few different things that it could be used for. So, and the first of them is like a decision support system. So you have a lot of information that needs to be processed to make sense of what's going on. These might be images, these might be intelligence reports, all of these things, right? So chatter that you see from internet traffic, all of these things are inputs to that help you decide on what course of action to take. So a generative AI, I mean, like a system like Claude could then be used for these kind of decision support systems. In a sense, they help you shorten the OODA loop. An OODA loop is military parlance for like observe, orient, decide, and act. So this is how a decision would be taken to do something. So you observe what's going on, you orient towards what might be of importance, and you take a decision on the action that's required, and then act on it. Right? So, and considering the volume of information that's out there, a system that can pass through all of that and separate the signal from the noise can help you fast track this. It can help you shorten this OODA loop and take decisions faster. So that's one, I think, big use case for such a system. Others include wargaming and conflict simulation. You can come up with 100 different scenarios and play those out and see which is a more promising situation. I mean, a promising kind of an approach to take. And you also have information warfare or disinformation, which could be orchestrated using these kind of systems. And then you have cybersecurity, offensive or defensive kind of cybersecurity operations that could be carried out. And lastly, even autonomous weapon systems to some extent. Right? So you could have swarms of devices like drones, which could be coordinating with each other and doing something. So these are different kinds of things that you could possibly carry out. Now, what specific use case amongst these different options was used in, say, by the U.S. military in any of their operations recently has not been disclosed. So it could be used for some of these kinds of operations, and what I would think is that it's still not something that's fully autonomous yet, but it's something that maybe raises some concerns about how these systems could be used for. And the tussle between Anthropic and the Department of War is that Anthropic wants certain red lines on what it will not be used for, and this also makes sense because if the National Security Agency, the NSA, which when I think a decade ago, when Edward Snowden published all these whistleblower reports about what the NSA was doing about surveilling at a large scale the entire conducting large scale surveillance of citizens of the US. So if such an agency, which is also under the Department of War, then there's a possibility that they could carry out similar surveillance operations domestically, right? So that's one concern. So I guess Anthropic is saying we are a more responsible company, and we are standing up and saying that we don't want our models to be used for a few different higher risk kind of applications, which would be a threat to democracy, and that's kind of their stand on this issue.
Right. And also, I think positioning themselves as a trusted defense partner, apart from the high contract value and long term stability that these contracts bring, allows Anthropic to also leverage that relationship in their enterprise customers. This could be in highly regulated sectors like financial services, healthcare, and this relationship with the US military, which it was obviously pursuing until this turn of events changed. I think some things for Anthropic. At least the balance that Anthropic was trying to manage was to be a trusted defense partner with some ethical guidelines, while also using that as a way of positioning itself as a partner for highly regulated enterprise sectors. How do you think this commercial and military applications, and at least the business interests that Anthropic obviously has outside that of the US military, might play out?
Anthropic has always tried to position themselves as a more responsible AI company. And in a sense, I guess they've tried to use this safety as a moat, saying that when almost most of these frontier models are kind of similar in their capabilities, Anthropic is saying that they are a safer company or a more responsible company, and they're using this sense of or this perception of being a responsible company as a moat compared to other companies that are doing the same kind of offering. But I guess the challenge also is that they have also argued that, so when you're talking about building something that's a pretty powerful technology. So Anthropic has spoken about how their generative AI models are similar to nuclear technology, in the sense that the focus should be on non-proliferation. It should not get into the hands of someone who's not responsible. For a long time, they have argued that inputs into building such systems need to be controlled and restricted. So they've argued for export sanctions on semiconductor chips that could be used for training AI to companies in China. So in this kind of a situation, you see that this kind of narrative that has been created about AI being comparable to a nuclear technology is a double-edged sword, right? So you say that it is something that's so powerful that you should not hand it over to an adversary, or you should limit its proliferation. But for the US government, it's now a question about a private company saying that they will decide how this technology is to be used, or they are standing up to how the US government wants to use this technology. And in a sense, you can think of a democratically elected government saying that this is something that's really powerful and we are best placed to decide how it's to be used, and a private company that has built this saying that they know better and that they will decide how their model gets to be used. So you see this kind of a tension in the kind of narrative that has been promoted by AI companies, trying to talk about this as something that's too powerful to be spread widely, and that it should be only developed and controlled by a few responsible companies. And now that's coming back to bite them, saying that this is too powerful for even these companies to decide what should be done with it. So I guess that is kind of backfiring for Anthropic and other AI companies as well. So even OpenAI has kind of been a little cautious about now saying that Anthropic should not be labeled a supply chain risk in some sense. So you see that this kind of a narrative has its problems as well.
Yeah. The recent accusation that Anthropic has for 3 Chinese research labs, specifically about illicitly distilling its model, Claude, specific to some reasoning tasks and so on. Firstly, just for context, what does this distillation entail? And secondly, some of that may actually be counter to what Anthropic CEO himself has been talking about, which is what we just spoke about, comparing AI, at least frontier AI innovation, to being similar to nuclear weapons. But the fact that Chinese companies can try and reverse engineer model outputs also gives you some limitations about the ability to control AI the same way you can control and trace nuclear material, right? So, what does this episode also tell you about maybe some of Anthropic's priorities, but also broadly about AI diffusion?
At least in our research, we have argued that generative AI, even these frontier models, are a kind of a general purpose technology in the sense that they have a lot of different uses. And the same technology that's used for civilian use cases, for economic use cases, also have military use cases. And a lot of this kind of a development is being led by private companies. And the most productive, I mean, the most frontier of these capabilities are actually in civilian use cases. So when that is the case, it's hard to say that this should be controlled very tightly. It should not be made available for anyone outside of this tight circle. So it's hard to put these kind of guardrails on who should have access and who should not. Right. So that's one point. On the diffusion bit itself, so there are a lot of reasons why controlling it is difficult, right? So one is that talent moves freely. So the same engineers who are working in Anthropic might move to a rival company. The same engineers who are in OpenAI actually founded Anthropic to some previously. So you see that that's already happened to some extent. And you see this kind of a movement of talent. So this movement of talent will happen between companies, they'll happen between countries. And so it's hard to really control any secrets that might be there in building these kind of frontier models. So that's one part of it. And a lot of these inputs to these models are also very they have multiple uses. So the same chips that are used for training AI are also it's hard to restrict who gets access to it. So there have been a lot of efforts, in restricting access to China, and some of those have been reversed because it was maybe hard to completely enforce it, and also because Nvidia was losing a big market share if Chinese companies were not buying from it. And in the long term, Chinese companies will again build those chips and capabilities, and they will have more incentive to do so if Nvidia chips are being restricted to them, right? So so all of these factors kind of make it harder to restrict someone from getting access to this technology. So in that sense, I guess it's hard to control very tightly who gets access, who does not. And there are a bunch of open weight models as well. So you have DeepSeek, which is a Chinese model that has been whose weights have been released openly. You have Meta, who has released a bunch of their models as open weight models. Even OpenAI has some of their pretty not the most capable models, but slightly less powerful models, which have been released openly. So you see that in this kind of a situation, it's hard to control in a very tight way the who gets to have access. And yeah, I guess that's part of the problem. And distillation basically is a process by which you take a very powerful model, a much more powerful model, and then use the output of that model to train a smaller, less powerful model, so that it can give you comparable performance at a lower cost, at a lower training budget, and so on, right? So, and a bunch of Chinese companies have been accused of distilling models from American companies, and they've been accused of using a lot of deceptive techniques, which makes it harder to restrict such efforts. So when, even if you consider that chips could be restricted, distillation is something that's just asking questions and then using the outputs of those questions to train some models. So, and it gets increasingly complicated to restrict such access if someone is trying to do something like this, right? So I guess that's where that's also a part of this problem about how it's hard to contain these models to specific use cases or specific countries or people or companies. So yeah.
Yeah. No, thanks for this, Bharath. I think we have to ask this question that if a private company is calling for regulation on the sector, and in some sense also calling upon the technology that they're building as so imminently dangerous, and in some sense, as seen with the Chinese example, conflating business competition with national security while calling for regulation. I think you also have to ask just naturally the question about incentives and what this means for the commercial interests vis-a-vis actually the ability to have any meaningful implementation of the same export controls. And like you were saying, I think AI, unlike previous technologies, first came about, or at least the most frontier of it is currently out in the open. And any adoption by the military will not be a spin-off from the military to civilian, but actually a spin-on from civilian applications to military applications. So in that sense, some of these guardrails would be even more difficult. And perhaps going forward in line with the tussle that Anthropic is currently having with the Department of War, and also seeing how OpenAI came about and seems fairly more eager to sign the same contract, we see that perhaps it's a matter of time before companies fall in line. And of course the state is more powerful than a private company, and hence it's very likely that the state will be able to push through what it seems is just the best technology available to then be used as it pleases. What do you think are some of the implications of this vis-a-vis just how military AI is progressing, and specifically for India?
I think before I want answer that, right? So another thought that came to my mind when we were talking is how this is such a competitive space that even if one company decides that they're not going to, they want to draw some red lines, or they don't want their models to be used for certain use cases, you'll see that there are a bunch of other companies which are willing to make that trade-off, and which are okay with their models being used for this thing if they get a lucrative contract that can in a space where there's a lot of investment being poured in without any pathway to profitability for a lot of these companies. So you see that some companies might be willing to make that trade-off, right? So loosen those guardrails in some sense. And you can also understand the concern that about how these models will be used when the Department of Defense has been renamed to Department of War. So you can understand, I guess, the purpose that it could be put to when the name itself has been changed. So that's something that just crossed my mind. So coming back to your question about what that means for military users and what that means for India. So I guess for military users, it's very hard to restrict. So with generative AI, if it is to be seen as a general purpose technology, if it's something that's being driven by the private sector, whose proliferation is hard to restrict, and you'll see that diffusion is what matters in terms of getting the most out of those capabilities rather than the invention itself. So, and diffusion is applying these to a bunch of use cases, applying it to different kinds of scenarios. And you'll see that a lot of militaries across the world, armed forces across the world, will be willing to experiment and try a bunch of use cases and see what they can gain out of it. So once such a technology is out there and it's easily accessible, I guess it's not too far that you can expect it to be used for a lot of different applications. And when this is something that's happening, you need some sort of a plurilateral effort to ensure that this is done in a way that is responsible, that you have some visibility into what kind of uses it is being put to, and maybe some mechanisms where it can be auditable, like you have a group of peers which are responsible to monitor and audit and ensure that these are being implemented in a certain way, and voluntary commitments on not using it for certain kinds of use cases. I think those are things that where you need diplomatic efforts, you need countries talking to each other about these kind of things, and I think that's something that's very important. And what it means for India, it's something that's where you will see that when you have a lot of conversation about AI sovereignty, in a lot of economic use cases, I guess it does not matter too much whether that model that is being used is really developed indigenously or whether it's developed in a frontier lab. And in most cases, you will see that the most capable models that are out there for at least reasoning or logical reasoning kind of purposes are labs that are based out of the US, and that's okay, right? So but if it is for something that's a military use case, then I guess there are concerns about sovereignty, about having models that are developed indigenously which are capable of performing these kinds of actions, and that's an important factor to consider from an Indian perspective, I would think.
Yeah, and hence maybe pushing for some kind of plurilateral agreements where we can at least agree on some guardrails, a little more responsible use of AI when it comes to the military. I think that might be helpful, right?
Yeah, that's, I think, something that's really important, but I'm not sure if there is consensus to come and engage in such talks to make it happen. But if that's one thing that should be a focus in these kind of multi-stakeholder gatherings, like the AI summit, right? So those are platforms which could highlight such concerns and maybe come to some form of consensus on what kind of uses are okay and what kind of guardrails you need to have in place, and how do you ensure that. So it's not so much that an autonomous system will take some kind of a decision that will cause a problem, but the scale and the speed at which decisions will be made creates, it's possible that things could go wrong inadvertently. You might make a decision that's not, those checks and balances which are there, which slow down that process of taking decisions. Those might be fast tracked, and you'll see that the risks might be higher because of that. So having a more transparent process for such decisions, I think, and collaboration between countries on how do you build such guardrails is something that's a really important necessity right now.
Yeah, yeah. And specific to Anthropic, looks like all the investor pressure and just this supply chain threat, the risk that it's been labeled already, will only mean that it's a matter of time, at least. At least that's an opinion here. Before Anthropic falls in line, and these things align to the needs of the state, the country in which these companies are headquartered. And I think then the need for some of these plurilateral agreements will be a little more explicit. Bharath, thank you so much for this conversation, and we'll keep tracking developments in the space.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks everyone for listening in, and hope to see you again here.
If you liked our show, dive into Takshashila's research on technology, strategy, and economic affairs. Check us out at our Twitter handle @Takshashila INST or our website takshashila.org.in.